What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another video from the 10-7 MMA show. And this one is all about my favorite UFC fighter, which is Khamzat Chimaev. And this video might be a little bit controversial, but it's all about why I believe that one day Khamzat Chimaev will be the greatest fighter of all time. And this is 7 reasons in support of this theory. So without further ado, here we go. So the first reason why I believe Khamzat will be one of the greatest fighters of all time is by comparing his stats for his first 7 fights against arguably 5 other fighters that are considered the greatest fighters of all time. And these fighters are Khabib, GSP, Anderson Silva, Demetrius Johnson, and Jon Jones. So just firstly looking at their records for their first 7 fights, a lot of people want to downplay Khamzat's achievements. Some people want to say that they think that Kamaru Usman beat him, which is definitely not true. It was a very competitive fight. I don't think we can say that. It was a close fight with Gilbert Burns as well, but he still won. He came out with those victories. Now, even if we look at these fighters, right, the only 2 other fighters that had undefeated records for the first 7 fights was Khabib Nurmagomedov and Anderson Silva. Now, if we also look in general, right, here's Khamzat at the bottom with 7-0. And if we look at general outside of these 5 potential GOATs, we can see that this 7-0 starting record hasn't been achieved very many times. Now, this is a list compiled by ChatGPT. I don't know if it's fully comprehensive. I asked to make it as comprehensive as possible, but the bottom line is he's in the company of a very small fraction of fighters that have indeed started 7-0, right? Some of these names we remember as current fighters, Ilia Topuria being one of them, Israel Adesanya, etc. But you can see he's in this small elite group already. He's already done so much, and so he's definitely on his way. The second reason comes from looking at total fight time for the first 7 fights in the UFC. And again, I'm comparing them against those 5 potential GOATs. Now, again, we see Khamzat at the bottom, and he has the shortest amount of fight time if you look at his first 7 fights compared to anybody except for Anderson Silva. And you also have to take into account that some of these other fighters, or most of them, do not have undefeated records. You could kind of consider Jon Jones to be undefeated, as one of his losses was a DQ, and people have now gone back and said that was a completely nonsense call with an illegal, supposedly illegal elbow. So we can obviously kind of look at Jon Jones as still being undefeated as well. But Khamzat only had 2 fights that went the distance in these first 7 fights. Again, they were very competitive fights against Gilbert Burns and, once again, Kamaru Usman. And we should talk more about that Kamaru Usman, which I will talk about that fight a little bit later, where he was injured and he thought he broke his hand. But you can see his fight time is very, very low otherwise, because he finished his opponents so quickly, often in the first round, sometimes second round in the rest of those 5 fights. Next, we're going to look at the UFC title fights for his first 7 opponents. I think this is also an indication of the strength of Khamzat's first 7 opponents, particularly with Gilbert Burns and Kamaru Usman. We can see that in total, between Gilbert Burns and Kamaru Usman, they had 9 title fights, right? Obviously, Kamaru Usman comprises 8 of those 9, so that's a large chunk right there. But that just shows the strength of the opponents that he was fighting. Now, if you look at GSP, I mean, that's pretty crazy. But again, this is also looking at GSP's opponents at the end of his career. So there's still more time for some of Khamzat's opponents to still accrue more victories and title fights. But the bottom line is he has not had an easy road. He's had pretty difficult fights, especially the last 2. But even before then, you want to discount Kevin Holland. Kevin Holland is a very, very dangerous fighter. That was a really, really challenging fight. Nobody finishes Kevin Holland the way that Khamzat Chimaev did. Again, it was short notice. I know it was a change-up, but that was still extremely impressive. Li Jingliang is a very, very strong fighter as well. That was extremely impressive. So don't just write those off. Those were unbelievable performances. And if you remember at the time on his rise before being known, Dana White said he had never seen a fighter like Khamzat Chimaev. We cannot forget these details and these statements. Next, I want to look at the total wins accrued for those first 7 opponents. And if you look at Khamzat Chimaev, this is the total amount of wins that all of his 7 initial opponents have accrued. And that's a pretty staggering number, and it's the most out of these other 5 opponents, right? If you look at Jon Jones, Demetrius Johnson, all of their opponents for those first 7 fights had less than this total amount of wins. So this again just shows, even think about Gerald Meerschaert. He was a vet. He was a very tough fight, and he's done very well since that Khamzat Chimaev fight when he did lose in the first round very quickly by knockout. So it just once again shows that if you want to discount it and say he's at an easy road, is simply not the case. Next, we can look at his wrestling pedigree. Obviously, we see he shoots takedowns very effectively and goes to submissions or ground and pound very, very effectively in his first 7 fights in the UFC. But just looking at his wrestling pedigree, he is a 3-time Swedish national champ in freestyle wrestling, 24-0. Freestyle and folk style are considered the 2 most effective wrestling styles in mixed martial arts. Obviously, some people may disagree with me, but I think that's the general consensus. So that is no joke. And you got to remember, he took Kamaru Usman down 4 times. Guess what? He's only been taken down 1 other time in his entire career, and that was against Leon Edwards, believe it or not. He shot a takedown. I don't think Kamaru Usman thought it was going to happen, saw it coming, got taken by surprise. This is 4 times in that first round. Now, the only reason, by the way, why I believe it didn't happen again in the second and the third is, once again, Khamzat Chimaev thought he had broken his hand. He hadn't broken it, but he had severely injured his hand in the first round and was unable to do so again. Now, a lot of people pointed to cardio issues that were causing his slowdown later on in the Kamaru Usman fight. I disagree. I don't think it was a cardio issue. I think this whole idea that his cardio is what is holding him back is incorrect. I think he actually has tremendous cardio, and I think we're going to see that in this next fight. The last thing I wanted to point out is Anthony Smith, to me, one of the most trusted analysts in the game. He says anybody in the world he can beat in the first round. He's talking about Khamzat Chimaev. We start getting into the second, third, fourth, fifth. The Gilbert Burns fight is a perfect example. If that fight goes another 2 rounds, he'd be in trouble. First round, monster. I'm going to slightly disagree with the Gilbert Burns dissection, saying that, hey, he got in trouble in those later rounds. That was only a 3-round fight, but once again, in that fight, again, it may sound like I'm making excuses for him, but his coaches had stated in the aftermath of that fight that Khamzat did not listen to their instructions, and he continued to want to stand and bang and do things that they were not in favor of. Okay, so I think he could have done far better in that fight had he followed the instructions. And maybe that's a maturing thing, whatever, but I don't think that comes down to a cardio issue. Yes, he had COVID and he had some issues and some setbacks, but I bet you, just based on the way that he trains and how devoted he is to the sport of mixed martial arts, I think this is not true, and I think we're going to see that his cardio is far better than we think against Robert Whittaker. The 6th reason why I think he will be the GOAT is because he has tremendous speed advantage. Despite having such a large size and so much strength, he has got tremendous speed, both when it comes to grappling and takedowns. They come with unrivaled speed, his accuracy, as well as striking. So this is a quick clip that highlights both of these elements. So I'm just going to let this play, and you can see from the fights, you might remember these. Okay, so this is again Gerald Meerschaert. He had that 17-second knockout. The reason why this knockout came so quick is Gerald didn't even see the punch coming, right, against Li Jingliang. He shot in right at the beginning. If you guys remember this fight, and then he carried Li Jingliang to the cage where Dana White was standing, choked him out immediately. Gilbert Burns, this wasn't a knockout, this was a decision, but that speed was incredible. Kevin Holland, we do know he shot in right at the beginning of that first round, almost at the glove touch. Some people criticize him for that. I don't know. You should defend yourself at all times is the statement that most people said. But anyways, he has insane next level speed, and I think that is going to carry him forward. Okay, the final point is that he is fearless. Khabib Nurmagomedov, many other fighters have talked about the brain and the mind being the most important element in mixed martial arts. And I think the fact that he is truly, truly fearless, he truly loves this sport. You can see it in his eyes at the pressers. You can see it when he comes into the cage. He's excited. He's ready to go. I think that's a major, major component that's going to contribute to his massive success in the sport. Yes, of course, we have some fighters that fought almost with fear, right? GSP had most notably fought with a tremendous amount of fear, and it worked for him. But I do think that this is going to be a massive benefit to Khamzat Chimaev. I think he's got the mental fortitude, that fearlessness, that love for the sport that's going to propel him onwards and onwards. And remember, why do I think he's going to be the greatest of all time? It's not just what he's going to do in the middleweight division, but I think he can do great things in the light heavyweight division, and who knows, maybe even heavyweight as he gets older and puts on more size. I think he can do it all. He's so well-rounded, and I think people are sleeping on him, and I think a lot of the criticism comes from the fact that people were believing he was like this invincible juggernaut at one point. He was just steamrolling everybody. early in his career, people were talking about him beating Kamaru Usman and saying that would be a tough fight, but this kid is so talented, maybe he could do it. Now he's done it, and then everybody wants to discount it. Again, yes, Kamaru Usman came in on short notice, but it's still Kamaru Usman. I mean, nobody has done what Khamzat did to Kamaru Usman. It's insane. So to write him off as anything other than, you know, an unbelievable, tremendous fighter that should be at least a single champ one day is ludicrous. But I think he's got more in him. I think he can be a double, even a potentially a triple champ if he so chooses to follow that path, which I think he will. So anyways, Khamzat Chimaev, mark my word, remember this day, looking into the future, he will be one of the greatest, if not the greatest of all time. Boom, done. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please click that like button. If you want to see more from the 10-7 MMA show, make sure to click subscribe. Thank you guys so much for joining, and I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.